Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Shelley Icona, founder of On ITS AXIS. This webinar was inspired by conversations that we have had with many global business leaders who, like you, have been asked to urgently adapt to significant changes in workforce process, business operations, and more broadly, in daily life. The fact that our attendees represent companies across the globe and span nearly all industry sectors, from government to nonprofit, and from fintech and retail to energy and agriculture, is a testament to the fact that although many of us are staying at home, we are not alone in the challenges we are being asked to face. Our speakers have extensive experience navigating change and driving innovation within the complex structure of enterprise organizations. Together, we have worked with organizations that span the Global 1000, including BIX, Samsung, Bank of America, P&G, Philips, Kellogg's, Johnson & Johnson, the U.S. military, W.L. Gore, HP, Bank of New York Mellon, Google, Amazon, Yahoo, Boeing, etc. We understand that these are challenging times and that the extent and pace of change can be completely overwhelming. Our intention today is to leverage our collective experience and provide you with several tools you can use to not only manage through the change, but to also optimize your unique business opportunity and accelerate your company growth during this period. Since 2009, On ITS AXIS has been working with organizations to help them accelerate their biggest opportunities. As we began to focus on the intersection of products and people, and our support of the Fortune 1000 increased, we saw a need to provide a data-driven framework to help enterprise organizations optimize. Our relationship with Swarm Vision began as a response to that gap. Today, we are a Swarm Vision partner. One of the best aspects of that business partnership is that it gave us the opportunity to collaborate closely with one of today's speakers, Suzan Briganti. Suzan is a serial entrepreneur based in Silicon Valley who has founded 3 successful startups, a fashion accessories brand, an innovation consultancy, and now Swarm Vision. With 25 years experience advising Fortune 1000s, she has played a key role in many industry firsts and has helped many organizations grow through change. Our second speaker, Kelly O'Connell, joined the On ITS AXIS leadership team after developing her professional experience with an early career in change management, in mergers and acquisition, and as an executive leader at the largest specialized global staffing and consulting firm, Robert Half and Protiviti. Kelly is a member of both the Forbes HR Council and the National Society of Leadership and Success. I can't count the number of times that I have read or heard that the experiences we are facing currently are unprecedented. In fact, I caught myself sharing this sentiment recently during a conversation. Although the situation we are facing is unprecedented, focusing on that as a central foundation for this situation only magnifies the very normal fatigue and fear that many of us experience in response to change. We understand that these are very difficult times, but each time the world has faced an unexpected crisis, it has been unprecedented. Today, we want to shift the conversation to focus on what we can learn from how leaders responded to those prior trials. According to Harvard Business Review, historically, how organizations respond to change and innovate in the face of those changes has been a key factor in organizational success. If we look back at the financial crisis and recession of 2008, we can see several examples of this with companies like Starbucks, Netflix, and Wells Fargo. Times of change are also times of opportunity for disruption. As was shared in The Economist, quote, "Downturns are capitalism's sorting mechanism." That same recession brought us Airbnb, Uber, Waze, Slack, and many other then startups that are now household names. We recognize that for many people, change is more than just uncomfortable. It is fatiguing and fear-inducing. We know that as leaders, you will have people who are just slow to react to the change, but are also actively resisting change. We also know that how your organization collectively responds to the current crisis, and also how it anticipates future customer needs, will determine the pace of your growth. In today's session, we'll be asking our panelists to share insights on how you can navigate that difficult balance. The first question for today's panel is for Suzan. Many analysts are talking about the potential for a recession or economic downturn based on the impact from COVID-19. From your perspective, where do you think we are in the response cycle? And how long do you anticipate this new normal to last?
Well, that's a very dazzling question. Do you want to turn on video, Shelley? It's up to you. Well, let me just say, first of all, that none of us, well, good morning and good evening to all of you, wherever you're joining from. I know we have some participants from Europe and even the Middle East, so it's quite late there. I just want to say first, obviously, none of us on the panel are public health experts, but like everyone else, we're spending exponential amounts of time looking at exponential graphs these days. And just looking through everything that we can find, this seems to be the most concrete and sensible framework that we've come upon. So this is actually from a very business-friendly think tank, the American Enterprise Institute. I'm not going to go through all of the text on the screen, but we can send you this link in chat or after the webinar. But what I like about it is it really outlines very specifically the 4 phases that we're going to need to go through. We're in the slow the spread phase now, phase 1. We can't wait to get to phase 2, where we reopen state by state, and then we'll be establishing immune protection and lifting the restrictions, and finally rebuild readiness for what is inevitably the next pandemic. If you can go to the next slide, I would appreciate it. There are some very specific metrics in there that I think are really useful, because certain states will be moving faster through these phases than others, and we could also have backslide. So you can be looking at these metrics and going, are we really there? So there are specifics like, hey, we need 30 acute care beds and 7 ventilators per 10,000 adults before we can move from phase 2 to phase 3. And we need to be able to test everyone and have an FDA-approved vaccine and millions of face masks before we can move from phase from 3 to 4. So overall, and this we'll look at how well this turns out in the end. Anyone who asks you to make a prediction is putting you on the spot, but I think we're looking at probably 3 to 6 months for phase 1, and that's hard to admit because I'm stuck home alone with a 16-year-old who would like to do nothing more than get away from his mother at this age. But I think that that's probably realistic. And I think by the fall, we'll be hopefully returning to some limited travel and events and hopefully live school. And if you have children at home, you know how much they are starting to want that even. But at any point, we could revert to a prior phase if there's a backslide. This virus is mutating. We don't know how climate and weather is going to change its path. And then overall, I think we should prepare for a total of 12 to 18 months to really get to phase 4. There is some good news, and this could go faster. I mean, there's a new vaccine in China coming out. Obviously, they're going through this thing earlier than we are, and that's going into clinical trials at the end of this month, which is very exciting. And we have emergency approval from the FDA for some treatments here in the United States. But even with all of this, I'm now of an age where I've been through several unprecedented crises, from 9/11 and the 2008 recession. And as you know, the economic impacts can take years to climb out of. And so we're going to spend the rest of this webinar focusing on how to mitigate the impacts. And I just want to wrap up this question by saying, as leaders, it's really our civic duty to not only help flatten the curve, the spread of the virus, but also to help soften that economic dip so it's less deep and less enduring.
Thank you, Susan. That was great and really informative. And you can show us your face now. I've enabled video for you.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Thank you. That's really, really informative. Let's move to Kelly. Next question. Kelly, between the number of rapid changes organizations have already been asked to adopt, the information that Susan just shared regarding the potentially prolonged recovery path ahead, and with this morning's really tough to hear announcement, record 6.6 million individuals filed for unemployment in the United States, many of our webinar participants may be feeling discouraged about the path ahead. So given your professional experience with change management consulting, what are your specific insights for our audience that might bring a bit of optimism?
Oh, she's muted.
And now I'm not. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. As we all acclimate to the new normal and Zoom as our primary format, I want to start by acknowledging that's really hard news to hear. 6.6 million unemployment claims filed last week represents roughly six months of unemployment trends from the 2008 recession that you mentioned earlier, and represents 9.95 million Americans who lost their jobs over the course of the last 2 weeks. And the impact is broader globally, and that is hard. And that's really a great place to focus. Change management consulting is hard. Many of our organizations, and Shelley, if you don't mind going to the next slide, many of our organizations, particularly enterprise organizations, have thought about change management. Change management, we talk about our plan, and we spend a lot of time thinking about how to anticipate what we might expect to happen, try to anticipate the impact of bringing two organizations together, for example, in mergers and acquisition. And even with sometimes 18 months of runway, 3 years of runway in mergers and acquisition, Harvard Business Review would share that most analysts look at a 50% trend of mergers and acquisitions that aren't successful. Change management is hard. When I was in the industry, we talked about roughly 70% not working. And that was largely due to the fact that there is a human element to change. And that's really where I want to talk, because I know I'm supposed to be optimistic here. And I think that when we're trying to anticipate everything that might happen, what happens is we feel overwhelmed, and we feel all of these scenarios actually compound that sense of overwhelm. And the reality is we can't, no matter how smart, and there are a lot of smart people who've joined this call and who will be listening in, no matter how smart, we can't always anticipate every human response. And as a result to that, we have moments of disappointment that leave people feeling like the messaging, the roadmap can't be trusted. And so one of the shifts that I believe in, that I think is an optimistic shift that our organizations can apply, is to move from this idea of focusing our energy around change management, and instead to develop our employee skill set, our organizational culture around change agility. How do we respond as an organization to the unexpected? How do we respond and create a path to anticipate what might happen in a safe way? And this is really done in an evolutionary way. It's about embracing flexibility. Please know that I recognize that may feel optimistic and idealist, that I recognize that you will have change resistors in your workforce, that we have to start from a place of of authenticity of where we are today. And so coming back to the crisis that we're in, we are facing the unexpected. And while some people can say we should have seen this coming, the truth is that how we respond, the extent that we respond, the timing, the pace, the elements of the roadmap, those things all require flexibility in our approach. And so really taking the moment to look at who are we as an organization today? What challenges did we have before we stepped in to the unexpected? What was our culture around trust of our leadership? And take a moment to potentially shift that conversation. Use this as an opportunity to create a compelling vision, one that's consistent and authentic and allows for room for the unexpected. Create an environment that embraces collaboration. And yes, sometimes that's even over Zoom. And gives us an opportunity to look at and support the strengths of our partners. Create an objective and key result culture that embraces optimism. And to take a moment to think about where we were just a few weeks before this change. Most organizations were, at a minimum, cautiously optimistic about the economic forecast. I can't tell you the number of times we talked about talent scarcity and how you had to compete for workforce employment. We had overwhelm about how to attract talent to your organization and work on your employer brand and make your company stand out in the noise of companies searching for talent. This is an opportunity to look at what goals you set and create a culture that allows for that shift. And it's a chance, as Suzan said, to look at the future, to reevaluate how much of your organizational energy is being spent on the lights and power and keeping the company in motion and satisfying the current environment. And look at what percentage can we adjust to think about how we anticipate the needs. When we look at companies from 2008 that did this well, the Starbucks, the Wells Fargo, I had the opportunity to work in M&A in the fintech sector. They took this change agility approach. Their leaders became innovators, and their companies grew from that change.
Thank you, Kelly. Let's move the next question to Suzan. Although Kelly just shared positive examples of how companies with a strong innovation culture were able to grow through the last economic downturn, we've recently heard many experts share that this is an unprecedented experience that has created a new normal for our business leaders to respond to. Suzan, you've spent your career at the intersection of research, strategy, and innovation. Can you provide our participants with any current examples where rapid force change has had a positive impact and how our audience might understand how their organizations can respond to improve their outcomes?
Yes, happily. We actually think that there are three ways that you should be responding, and I'll take you through each of these. The first one is obviously help people in the crisis now. Next, you should be planning to thrive in the new normal because we aren't going to go back to the way things were. We never quite do after a crisis. And thirdly, although it's going to sound counterintuitive, this is actually a time to start planning at least one moonshot. So let me start with how to help people in the crisis now. I want to give you some positive examples. You might have heard of this because it's been fairly well publicized, but I love what Dyson did, they're the vacuum cleaner company, and they've actually pivoted to manufacturing ventilators, which are urgently needed to keep people who have the worst symptoms of COVID-19 alive. You'd think a vacuum cleaner company, how can this really make sense? But it turns out I talked to some doctor friends of mine at Stanford, and they said in the advanced stages of COVID-19, the problem is your lungs are too weak to exhale. So you actually might die of carbon dioxide poisoning. And so it's the ability to suck that air out of your lungs that the ventilator needs to do. It's not just providing, flow by oxygen. And so as we all know, Dyson knows a lot about suction. And so it actually made a lot of sense for them. And within just about 2 weeks, they were able to come up with this ventilator, and they're shipping 10,000 of them right away, which is pretty amazing. So if you think about your capabilities from a higher level, okay, they know about suction. They don't know anything about medical devices, but they know about suction. So that's like a lateral shift, right, of a capability. Another really counterintuitive example is Mattel, which sits on warehouses full of fabric that probably is not needed right now to make those Barbie clothes, but they're using that fabric to produce hundreds of thousands of face masks. And I can only imagine the colors and the glitter and the trimmings, but it's a beautiful thing. So think laterally about what you might have as an asset. And then if you go to the next slide, this is a local example that I just love. This is a small business. We do have some SMEs on the call, so I wanted to include this. This is a local, very highly prized Scotch distillery, and they have stopped entirely their Scotch whiskey production. They've won pretty much every global award for their malted whiskey. They've completely stopped production of what they make, meaning no income. And instead, they've pivoted to producing hand sanitizer. They know a lot about alcohol. And they shipped yesterday their first gas tanker truck full of hand sanitizer, which they're providing to hospitals, first responders, homeless shelters all over the Bay Area, which is amazing. So if you think you're too small to do anything, if you think you're not in healthcare, how can I possibly do something? Here are 3 examples not from healthcare where they have shifted an asset. Another thing we should be doing is really starting to the first few weeks of K, I get it, you're reeling. You can hardly think about, what's going to be the new normal. It won't always be 100% Zoom calls, but there's evidence that we never really go back to the way things were. So it's a good time now to start to think about adjusting to the new normal. And if you could go to the next slide, I'd appreciate it. So if you manufacture goods, you know now to never rely on a single country for 90% of your supply chain, right? We'll never do that again. If you ship, if you're a retailer, you know now that having an online, website as a backup is not enough. You have to be able to do 80% or more of your business digitally. Back office, you could be one of these multinationals that we work with. All of a sudden, they still have to set up purchase orders and no one can log in. Everything has to be able to be done remotely. So this is the new normal. And I want to share a positive example of a company, and I'm going to just do a terrible job with pronouncing their name, but it's a Chinese cosmetics company called Lin Xingjuan, and I'm sure I just butchered that. But they were forced to shutter 40% of their stores during the crisis, the peak of the crisis in China. And instead, they redeployed about 100 of their beauty advisors from those stores to become online influencers. And they could just train them up because this is something everyone knows, inside every company, they know how to do the influencing. So they moved these people over to engaging customers virtually. And as a result, sales in Wuhan, which is actually where this virus came from, achieved a 200% growth compared to the prior year's sales, which is crazy. And then to top that off, they did a large-scale live stream shopping event and had even more of their sort of furloughed workers turn to shopping advisors. 60,000 consumers watched the live stream. And basically, per one shopping advisor, in 2 hours, they ended up doing the same business as 4 retail stores used to do. So things like this are possible, and these are signs that the new normal can be a positive. And if you go to the next slide, Shelley, this is going to seem certifiably insane, but I really want to start to encourage you to think about this, because in times of change, you can kind of get away with faster implementations. Special rules and sort of tolerances are sometimes what we see. And so if you were doing something at a pace, for example, your digital transformation, 10x it. If you are aware of some startups in your sector that could potentially completely disrupt you, either invest in them or start now to do something about it. As Shelley mentioned before, Airbnb started in the 2008 recession. And if Hilton and the other big chains had taken that seriously and come up with their own thing, they would have been able to prevent a lot of the disruption. So it's interesting, doing something that's 10x better than versus just doing a 10% improvement is not 100% harder, but it is usually 100 times more worth it.
That's awesome. Thank you, Suzan. I love that. We are moving through this webinar really quickly. I think we'd love to hear from Kelly. Briefly, if you could share with us, we heard from Suzan, rapid innovation working well. As business leaders and HR professionals are being asked to rapidly respond to major change in the workforce, do you think it's possible to achieve these goals, and what recommendations would you have for them?
So in the interest of time, if you could jump 2 slides. What I'd like to just share is, I mentioned change agility in my last conversation, and I think this is about really acknowledging where you are in your organization. And in a time of disruption, it's also an opportunity to connect with your workforce. As HR leaders, we spend a tremendous amount of time looking at who to hire into our workforce. Many organizations are less good at employee upskilling, at performance pathing for their teams, at really looking at individual strengths and their career goals and figuring out how to maximize that, not only for the organization's benefit, but also for the employee's benefit. And one of the things that I've loved about our partnership with Swarm Vision is that the profiling tool that Swarm Vision has enables you to really look at and predict innovation capacity, and all of the aspects of your team. And it takes all of the different types of personality within an organization to really drive. And so I really encourage organizational leaders right now to first empathize, create room, make sure that you connect with your staff, find ways to consistently support the team that you have today, and to create that compelling vision. But also take a hard look at how you've been doing business, at how you've designed teams, at how you set up objectives and key results for performance, and evaluate how you can tie those objectives to business outcomes that support the rapid change and that moonshot opportunity that Suzan just mentioned.
Great. Well, we're about at time. I think it would be a good idea, Suzan, if you could just share with us a little bit about one of the questions that came in was about the C-suite and leaders, and how can they make moonshots and innovations possible. What have you seen with Swarm? Can you share that with us before we close today?
Well, I'll just say that, we didn't really at Swarm predict this pandemic. But we did, back when we started, predict an accelerating pace of change. And the whole company is really founded on that premise that the pace of change will be accelerating. And what we saw from our 25 years of working with large enterprises is that we didn't really have a talent solution for that. And so we did conduct, the world's largest study of serial successful innovators. And if you go back a couple slides, you saw the 4 types of innovators. And what you'll see fundamentally is that they vary in their response to change and to how they can best be leveraged in these times. So if you follow Kelly's advice and understand the innovation talent that you have currently in your workforce, you'll see that the folks who are really good at continuous improvement can be placed now in jobs that are really working about how to adapt to that new normal, okay? And if you're going to 10x your product development and go from years of, to getting something out to 2-week sprints, you might want to engage your your explorers. And if you're going to take moonshots, you probably want to engage your transformers. And so really what we've provided here is a way for you to understand the innovation talent you have, organize it into more effective teams, efficiently upscale it so that they can thrive in uncertainty, which it seems that we're going to be doing for a while, and then drive a culture to help retain and support all of those types of innovators. So that's really what we have been doing the last few years, and we would like to encourage people to take the opportunity to, instead of looking at this crisis as just purely negative and horrible, which it has very big aspects of, but also to think of it as a sort of a warning shot across the bow that maybe we as organizations need to get good at thriving in change.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that our goal sharing today's content was to provide some tactical tools to help organizational leaders manage through this change, discover and optimize opportunities in products and people, and use those opportunities to accelerate company growth. Susan, if you or Kelly want to talk briefly about how we can help in that process before we close.
I think, as Susan said, change is moving rapidly, and as organizational leaders, we actually do have a moment. I've heard from many people that they have a shift in their schedule that's actually created more room for productive strategic tasks. And one of the models that we want to extend to you is, if you'd like to utilize the profiler, either to take it yourself and learn a bit about the innovator type that you may be, to learn a bit more about your leadership style, and to experience a bit of the innovation training, you'll have access to that. If you're an enterprise organization that wants to look at iterative change, or wants to look at how do you leverage your internal talent, we're going to offer 50 free licenses for you to be able to implement teams, put them through the profiler, and receive access to a Teams feature that we didn't talk about, but really gives you a great data-driven way to look at how to increase productivity and increase outcomes. And then we're here on the On Its Axis side to help you look at those results and identify how to leverage those results and fit them into your current roadmap. We're also here to help with your roadmap revisions, whether that's your product strategy roadmap or your customer engagement roadmap, or that's your organizational design and hiring roadmap. We just want you to know that we're here for you. You're certainly not alone. And we have a landing page that you can access that'll be available to you, where you can access these offers that'll be unique for you as participants on today's call.
Thank you. Thank you both, Susan, Kelly, for today. Thank you, attendees, for joining. I hope everyone found the information presented today valuable. Sorry we're a little bit rushed. We know there's no shortage of amazing content, especially right now, online every day. So we wanted to keep this brief enough but informative. And if you take nothing else away from today's session, I hope it's that we will get through this collectively. We need to support each other, and that organizations right now have an opportunity, a big opportunity, to still thrive, be proactive, stay flexible, and make the most of these opportunities. So thank you for your time today. We wish you, your families, and your colleagues a safe and healthy time. And wherever you are in the world right now, we wish you a good day. Thank you so much for joining us. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared. If you'd like to re-listen, or for those of you that might benefit from it, please share it with them. Stay well.